they're very angry about this. They've said, why should we have to get a prescription? Why can't we do what's best for our health and just get these products? The model that the government's proposed is onerous, it's costly, and people are refusing to do it.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Vaping Unplugged podcast. Everything you need to know about vaping and tobacco harm reduction.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Vaping Unplugged, the World Vapers Alliance's podcast. I'm Michael, the director of the World Vapers Alliance, and I'm happy to announce that we will be talking today with Colin Mendelsohn, one of our heroes in the advocacy world. He is from Australia, and Colin graduated as a doctor from the University of Sydney. He worked as a general practitioner for almost 30 years with a special interest in smoking cessation. And I think as activists and vaping consumers, we all know him from Twitter, where he's super active and he's always speaking up against the bad regulation in Australia and worldwide. So I'm really happy that we have him on the show, and let's get into it and enjoy the conversation with Colin. Hello, Colin. Thank you for joining us again. Welcome back to Vaping Unplugged. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Michael. Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, I think it's a very good timing to get some updates on Australia because there are some movements, as you told me before. But before we get into this, may I ask you to give us a short overview? What is the current situation in Australia, and why is harm reduction such a hot topic in Australia, and what's the role of the current regulation in that?
Yeah, look, we've got a unique regulatory model in Australia, the prescription-only model. So if you want to vape legally in Australia, you have to go and see a doctor and get a prescription, and then find a pharmacist who has stock and buy from the pharmacist. We're the only country in the world that has that model. And the aim of it was to enable vapers to get good products, regulated products, with the support of a medical practitioner, and to avoid youth vaping, to minimize youth vaping. But it's been a total failure. I mean, less than 1% of doctors are willing to provide prescriptions. They're very uninformed about nicotine and about vaping. Very few pharmacists actually support vaping, and very few sell vaping products, and those that do have a very small range. And the whole process of getting a prescription, of course, is ridiculous. You can go into the corner shop and buy cigarettes very easily. And the idea of having to get a far safer product by jumping through all these hoops is absurd. And, vapers have voted strongly against this model. So over 90% of vapers in Australia have rejected the model and vape illegally and buy their products from the black market. And that's become a huge problem because the black market's controlled by criminal networks, and there's been an escalation of crime in relation to that. There are young people dealing vapes. There have been fire bombings of shops associated with turf wars between criminal gangs, 3 murders, extortion, a whole range of criminal activities. And of course, the money's going to criminal gangs for all sorts of other activities. And the criminal gangs, of course, and the retail outlets they supply are quite happy to sell to young people. So we've got this huge problem with kids vaping. And it's turned out to be the exact opposite outcome of what the government was planning.
And I learned from your blog that less than 10% of the vaping market is actually the legal market. So clearly there is a problem. And what is the government doing about this? Normally you would say probably let's reform this model, or are they doubling down on this?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's clear to everybody else that this model is failing, but it's a very political thing. It's difficult for a government who has championed this model then to suddenly turn around and say, oh, look, we got that wrong. We're going to try something different now. I mean, that's a very political decision and a difficult one. And so what our current government is doing, and our health minister said very clearly many times that vaping is a public health menace. and he needs to stamp it out. And he's come to this debate with very strong words against vaping. It's going to be very hard for him to back down and save face. So his approach is, we're going to double down on this. We're going to increase the border control to prevent these products coming into the country. And we're going to police and enforce illegal sales more severely, more strictly. But, we know that that doesn't work. I mean, we know that illegal drugs, border control and enforcement have a minimal effect on long-term supply. The border force as it is can barely manage to intercept a small quantity of illegal drugs. And, they're interested in heroin and weapons. They're not interested in mango vapes. I mean, and they're under-resourced as it is. So we know the government's plan to double down is just not going to work. And vapers have just rejected this model. They're very angry about this. They've said, why should we have to get a prescription? Why can't we do what's best for our health and just get these products? The model that the government's proposed is onerous, it's costly, and people are refusing to do it. And of course, the products that are available on the black market are unregulated. They're not approved for quality or safety. So that's another big problem. And the other major problem, which is driving this debate, is that kids are getting these products. And that's creating huge alarm and moral panic, as it is in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's always baffling, and I can't wrap my head around that we can't keep a prison drug free. How would a politician think that we can keep vapes out of a whole country? Yeah. That absolutely makes no sense. But before we go into the issue of the youth vaping, which is always mentioned, obviously, in general, what do you think is driving this current regulatory model or this anti-vaping stance of the government? Was there a tipping point or something?
Look, I think the main issue underlying it is, the main issue that they say is driving it is youth vaping. So it's all about, we've got to protect the youth and we've got to fight the tobacco companies, but we can't have youth, our vulnerable youth, getting addicted to nicotine. It's damaging their brains. It's leading them to smoking. All the nonsense that is not evidence-based, but is politically beneficial. So if they can say we're protecting kids and we've got to keep, and we're hearing all these stories about kids vaping, but the solution is not to ban harder. The solution is to change the whole regulatory model that's enable kids to get these products. And they just don't seem to understand that, or they don't want to understand it.
And how do the actual youth vaping and smoking numbers in Australia look like? Is it working, the model, or do they just state the goal but are not achieving it?
Well, it's interesting. Of all the vapers in Australia, less than 5% are under 18. Less than 5%. So we've got a policy based on less than 5% of the vaping population, and about half of those were already smokers. So, we're basing a policy on a very small section of the market. But having said that, what we're seeing in the youth population is that smoking rates are declining faster than ever. So in fact, the overall effect of vaping is positive. So in our two recent national surveys, daily smoking by under 18s was 0.9% in our main national drug strategy household survey. And in the Australian secondary school alcohol and drug survey, it was 0.3% of 12 to 17-year-olds, in that case, smoking daily. So as we're seeing in other jurisdictions, vaping is diverting young people away from smoking, but that never seems to get mentioned. It's all about, we're creating a new generation of smoking addicts. Vaping is leading young people to smoking. It's damaging their brains and all this sort of nonsense. Unfortunately, the debate is driven by a lot of misinformation and moral panic. Whereas I think overall, we don't want kids to vape or smoke, but the reality is that overall vaping is actually beneficial for the health of kids overall because of the reduction in smoking, and that's what's going to kill them.
And I mean, according to the WHO definition, that would constitute a smoke-free generation when it's below 5% smoking rate.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's very,
yeah,
very strange, strange and panic to have. And how does it look
exactly,
for? Because one of the problems with that is that sometimes it seems like the adults are forgotten, and the smoking adults especially.
exactly.
How
Yeah,
are the numbers there in
exactly.
Australia? Do you see
Yeah,
positive
yeah.
movement
Look,
there?
yeah, look. The numbers are increasing rapidly. There were an extra 400,000 vapors last year. So altogether, there's about 1.7 million vapors, which is about 8% of the adult population, which is high. Unfortunately, most of them are using illegal products. So then there's no quality control. The prices are going up now. The black market's taking over. Um, and they're not getting the support they used to get from the vape shops. So because as part of this crackdown on vaping, the vape shops are closing. The vape shops aren't allowed to sell nicotine liquid, e-liquid without nicotine, and they're not even allowed to sell hardware and accessories. So you have to go to the chemist to get all those things. And people are saying, "Look, blow that. That's ridiculous. I'll just go to the local corner shop or through social media, get the vapes I want." And unfortunately, we are seeing quite a few adults going back to smoking. They're saying, "Look, I don't want to break the law, and I'm not going to the doctor. And these products are just so freely available. So it's a disaster all round."
And how is the smoking rate doing? So is the increased vaping rate translating into lower smoking rates, or does this regulatory, I don't know how to call it, the regulatory hassles people need to go through hindering the lowering the smoking rate further?
Yeah, look, there are a lot of vapors. So smoking rates aren't going down as fast as they should be and as fast as they are in other Western countries. But because the number of vapors is increasing, we are seeing more recently an acceleration in the decline in smoking. But we compare ourselves to New Zealand. And in New Zealand, since 2016, the smoking rate declined by 53%. In Australia, it's been a decline of 32%. Now, the countries are very similar in every way in terms of tobacco policy and their demographics and so on. And yes, Australia's declined 32%. A lot of that is due to the increase in vaping, but nowhere near what they're seeing in New Zealand. So, and in other countries in the US and the UK, the decline, when we look at the figures, is much faster than in Australia. So it's a missed opportunity for public health in Australia. We would expect to see much larger declines if vaping was legal. A lot of people are reluctant to break the law because that's what you have to do. And it's a criminal offence to vape without and buy products without a prescription. A lot of people are reluctant to do that. So it's been detrimental to public health. That's for sure.
And I think then in summary, we could say that this model is failing. And I think one of the negative aspects of that is also that it spreads misinformation. It seems like in
Ah,
Australia, vaping
yeah,
is more regulated than actually the cigarettes, which are the most
yeah,
harmful way of consuming nicotine. But
exactly.
people get the
Yeah,
impression that vaping is actually the more harmful one, and we see that in service in other countries
exactly,
as well. Do
exactly.
you have
Yeah.
numbers for Australia there as well about the misinformation and comparing
Oh,
the
look,
harms and risks?
constantly. So the health minister, I mean, of all people, the health minister says this is a big tobacco conspiracy to addict a new generation of young people. When we look at the figures, about 3% of 14 to 17-year-olds may be addicted to nicotine. So, that's absurd that it's a new generation. He says it's a gateway. He quotes figures that suggest that vaping's going up in young people. It was a flawed study. The studies since then have shown the exact opposite. He says the kids are getting brain damage. It's a public health threat. Uh, the tobacco companies are marketing these products to youth. It's nothing to do with the tobacco companies. These are cheap models imported from China. I mean, there's just so much misinformation, and that's from the health minister. But in Australia, unfortunately, vaping's opposed by almost all our medical associations, all the state and federal governments, all the health charities, public health associations. So they've all got together in groupthink, in group lockstep, and they're all pushing this together. But what's happened recently is giving us some hope. So recently the government tried to push through another bill to restrict vaping further. Now that's gone to the Senate, which is one of the houses of the federal parliament, and it's created a debate, and it's now gone to an inquiry. So as a result of this, some of the opposition parties are now expressing support for reforming the vaping laws. So because of this outrageous bill that's trying to crack down even harder, two of the major political parties have now come out and said, well, we oppose this. We can see it's not working. And there's another major party we're waiting for a response from, the Greens. But if these parties do vote against this bill, it won't be accepted. And we feel this may be a trigger, because we know that the market research shows that 84% of the public think vaping should be available as a consumer product from retail licensed outlets, like it is in most other Western countries. So the public's behind it. The opposition politicians are starting to come out in favour of vaping reform. So we're hopeful that this is a bit of a turning point.
Yeah, that's very encouraging when at least a policy debate is started about this.
Yeah.
And you already mentioned the Senate inquiry. What is that exactly, and what is this Senate looking for?
Yeah, so the bill has gone through the House of Representatives, which is the lower house, which has a government majority, and that's been passed. And that's gone to the Senate. And the government doesn't have a majority there. They rely on votes from the other parties to get something through. And increasingly, there's this resistance to the government's model. So the Senate has sent the bill to a Senate inquiry, which is a selection of half a dozen senators who will be taking submissions. We've all put in our submissions, and hopefully they'll listen to witnesses, and then they'll make recommendations. And I think it's going to lead to change. I think they won't necessarily knock the bill back, but they will insist on changes, and hopefully significant changes that will change the whole way vaping is available in Australia, and that's what we're hoping for.
And who can submit to that inquiry? Is it also for individual consumers, or is it only for organizations?
Yes, it is, and we've got international experts, Australian experts, and Australian consumers are putting in submissions. Unfortunately, the deadline is Friday in 2 days, the 12th of April. So there's not much time for other people to apply at this stage, but hopefully they'll read the submissions. Unfortunately, what's happened with past inquiries is that they've come to these inquiries with a predetermined conclusion. So no matter what people say in the submissions, they've made up their minds and they don't really take any notice. But I think we've got to a point where there's enough opposition now, and public opinion's changed, and political opposition, that there's a possibility we may get a realistic response to this inquiry.
Yeah, that would be very good. We will definitely share that. And I saw you already submitted your piece to the Senate, so we will link that as well. If people can look into, and also your fantastic blog, which is a very useful resource for activists, not only in Australia, but around the world. So we will link that. And maybe as the final question or final part of the discussion, what is your general assessment about the future of harm reduction in Australia, especially, but also in general? Are you more on the positive or on the negative side of things?
Look, I've always been positive that this will change. This model is just unsustainable, and the evidence is just getting stronger and stronger. And there's only so long you can deny the evidence. And the fact is that harm reduction innovations are almost always resisted, whether it's pill testing or needle syringe programs, medically supervised injecting rooms, there's always resistance. The sky's going to fall in if we let these things happen. But of course it never does. And we find out as time goes by that they save lives, they save money. And we look back years later and say, why didn't we do that earlier? And I know that will be the case with tobacco harm reduction. And I think a lot of people are going to get egg on their faces who have been violently resisting this. So I think the future is bright, and I think as the evidence is just undeniable. I think now that there's such huge benefits from facilitating harm reduction, and we can see in Australia the problems it creates with when we don't go down that path. So I'm feeling optimistic.
That is fantastic to hear, and I think everyone is encouraged by that. So I will keep it with that. We love to hear some positivity when we read all the time this negative news. So that's very welcome. And thank you again for your time. It was a great pleasure to have you on again. And I hope to see you soon again.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for asking me. See you soon.
See you. Bye-bye. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Colin. What an amazing individual. And I think we can't say too often what he's doing for the vaping world and the harm reduction world. And us as a consumer organization, we are highly thankful for having him and his voice. It's very helpful. And as we have heard, there are some positive signs even for Australia. So let's hope so. And let's support him wherever we can. Let's raise our voices, not only in Australia, but worldwide, because this is kind of the worst case example we can have. And let's try to do everything to push it in the right direction. I hope we see you back soon next week with another episode of Vaping Unplugged. And basically, I only can leave you with vape on and enjoy.